Imagine a hidden history, a secret current flowing just beneath the surface of our so-called rational world. What if this unseen force has been quietly pulling on the strings of power, of art, even our deepest beliefs for centuries?
Right.
What if the most profound, most earth-shattering changes in our society weren't actually driven by cold, hard logic, but by something far more mysterious?
Something tapping into our primal urges, maybe, our unacknowledged desires.
Exactly. And what if the man who dared to map this vast underground of rejected knowledge, James Webb, what if he found himself utterly transformed by that journey?
Confronted, wasn't he, with ideas so powerful, so compelling, that they actually challenged the very foundations of his own rational mind.
Yeah.
It's almost as if grappling with such profound, often dismissed knowledge became, maybe too much to handle. It seems like it profoundly affected his own perspective.
There's definitely this enigmatic air around his later years, isn't there? A sense that the sheer weight of what he uncovered kind of shifted his own ground.
Irrevocably, perhaps. This historian, James Webb, tragically committed suicide at just 33 years of age. And what makes this so haunting, is the context. For the last 2 years of his life, he plunged into a deep existential distress and depression. He was battling what sounds like psychosis, even spending time in a hospital and receiving antipsychotics. Now imagine this. Webb, this brilliant, skeptical historian who had all these occult ideas swimming around in his head from his extensive research, he was trying to frame them skeptically, but some of it he felt was just making sense. His wife, Mary, apparently saw his research as rubbish and wasn't very sympathetic, which couldn't have helped. And here's where it gets truly unsettling. There's a serious question, debated among those who knew him and studied his work, about whether he was trying to imitate a conscious death. You see, that's a concept from George Gurdjieff, an early 20th century mystic, whose teachings he studied so deeply, like how Gurdjieff's associate, P.D. Ouspensky, tried to die alert and without medication to preserve his energies for the quote-unquote otherworld.
It's just a horrifying end for such a bright mind, and it really raises questions about the potential dangers of one's worldview just being completely shattered by profound and often otherworldly, esoteric ideas. We're talking about a story so wild, so interwoven with the fabric of modern history, it might just make you question everything you thought you knew. We're about to crack open James Webb's seminal work, The Occult Establishment. It's a book that dives headfirst into what he called the flight from reason that so profoundly shaped our modern world.
And the mysterious figures who believed they held the keys to, other reality.
Exactly. And Webb himself, our intrepid author, he actually started this whole project as a skeptic. He often labeled these movements as irrationalists.
Right, that initial bias is key.
But the deeper he went, the more he realized these irrational forces weren't just fringes, they were profoundly impactful.
Yeah.
And that initial skeptical bias he brought, it actually puts his later, deeper insights into a truly profound perspective. It's almost as if the sheer weight of what he uncovered became a personal odyssey for him too.
It absolutely did. Webb's own journey through these texts and histories provides this fascinating lens for us to explore the material, doesn't it? It shows how even the most rational mind can be confronted by the persuasive power of ideas that dwell outside conventional thought.
Totally.
He began with a rationalist's viewpoint, maybe even a slight disdain for what he termed eccentricities and downright mistakes. But the evidence he unearthed, it just forced him to acknowledge the undeniable influence and even the sort of internal logic of these seemingly irrational systems.
Okay, so if you are ready to get your mind absolutely blown, to peel back the layers of history and discover the hidden forces at play, buckle up, you curious explorers.
Yeah.
Because this is going to be one wild ride into the secret history of the modern age. Go ahead and smash that like button, subscribe to the deep dive, and join our community.
Please do.
Trust us, you won't want to miss a single aha moment because we are just getting started. Okay, let's unpack this. Webb argues the 19th century wasn't just about, the gleaming marvels of the Industrial Revolution or the cold, hard facts of science.
All right, there was something else going on.
Beneath that veneer of progress, there was this deep, deep undercurrent of unease, a widespread crisis of consciousness, as he calls it.
Precisely. Imagine looking around at the dawn of the industrial age. Factories churning, cities swelling, scientific rationalism trying to explain absolutely everything, and these rigid social structures firmly in place.
Yeah, sounds efficient, maybe, but cold.
Exactly. Many people felt this profound spiritual void. They were asking, is this truly all there is to human existence? Just this material world, this endless cycle of production and consumption.
So they started looking elsewhere.
They began looking for answers outside the traditional boxes in places society had previously dismissed as, well, irrational.
Yeah.
This was the genesis of what Webb terms the flight from reason.
Right. So you have this new rationalist, materialist, industrial society emerging, but it's leaving a lot of people feeling kind of empty, ruthless even. The old certainties, particularly Christian ones, were under attack from new scientific scrutiny, weren't they? And traditional social structures were eroding because power was shifting.
From inherited status to negotiable capital. Basically, money talks.
So when your spiritual anchor starts dragging in this stormy sea of change, where do you turn? What do you grab onto?
That's the critical question, isn't it? Webb suggests this reaction was a desperate quest for a whole man, a complete, all-embracing worldview that felt lost in an increasingly fragmented modern world.
A search for wholeness.
Exactly. These occult ideas weren't just quirky hobbies for eccentrics on the fringe. They became an index of a wider attitude to the broader questions of life. They offered a comprehensive philosophical framework, much like traditional religious faith once did.
So it wasn't just about believing weird stuff.
Not at all. It was for those rebels seeking to challenge the monster of materialist society. What's truly fascinating here is how these esoteric beliefs often imply an all-embracing worldview. So when influential people embraced them, it wasn't just a casual interest. It revealed their entire wider attitude to life, their fundamental philosophy.
Absolutely. And this occult wasn't just random weirdness or isolated pockets of belief. Webb argues it's an inevitable mirror image of society itself.
A mirror image. How so?
It reflects all the anxieties, the fears, and the suppressed desires that the mainstream society was trying so hard to ignore or push down. It's like society was holding up a funhouse mirror, and the occult was the distorted yet incredibly telling reflection of its hidden self.
That's a powerful image. And initially, this flight from reason and the rise of the occult provided solutions to a fundamentally religious crisis of consciousness. People were turning into spiritualism for answers, things like seances, spirit photography, and joining new groups like Theosophy, Christian Science, or the Freemasons.
So it started with the soul, the individual.
People sought individual salvation, trying to repair a tottering social fabric with essentially religious approaches. They found that non-Christian, often occult traditions offered potent philosophical tools to counter the materialist tide that felt so overwhelming.
But then, after World War I, something changes, right? The scale of the devastation must have shifted things.
Profoundly. The sheer devastation, the societal breakdown, the immense loss of life, it changed the focus. Concerns moved from purely individual spiritual salvation to collective security.
So it became less about me and more about us.
It certainly did. The fundamentally religious approach didn't just disappear, but it became deeply entangled with more immediate societal and political concerns. Webb points out how these religious or mystical impulses became transformed into illuminated politics, scholarship, or social theory.
Illuminated politics, what does that mean exactly?
It means that these deeply held, often mystical beliefs began to influence how people thought about governing, about education systems, or the very structures of society. It rapidly evolved into a collective, almost desperate effort to repair a tottering social fabric, transforming a fundamentally religious impulse into a search for collective security. People were starving for answers, you see, and the old ones fell hollow.
Okay, so the 19th century lays this powerful groundwork with a deep societal longing for something more than just material existence. But then, as we enter the 20th century, something utterly cataclysmic happens. World War I. How did that immense trauma, that global catastrophe, accelerate this already present flight from reason into an even deeper, more immediate crisis?
Well, the First World War utterly shattered any lingering faith in rationalism. I mean, the sheer unfathomable scale of the destruction, the senseless slaughter, the technological barbarity, it forced humanity to confront its own profound imperfection and capacity for self-destruction. It was horrific. Webb contends that the revival of occult beliefs after WWI was even more pronounced, offering not just religious solace for the individual, but also perceived solutions to much broader, more immediate societal concerns. There was a palpable, almost desperate sense that the world, as they knew it, was irrevocably broken beyond conventional repair.
So, with the world seemingly broken, the solution for many became about changing man himself, a powerful belief that the only way forward, the only true fix, was the perfection of the human being. Because, let's be honest, humanity had just shown itself to be pretty imperfect and self-destructive on a global scale. This led to some truly surprising and, at times, fantastical personal syntheses of thought. Can you give us an example of how people envisioned this human perfection?
Oh, this is where we see incredibly creative, if sometimes wildly imaginative, combinations of ideas. Consider W.E. Evans Wentz, a renowned scholar who traveled extensively researching fairy lore. He developed what he called his Celtic esoteric theory of evolution. Now, imagine this concept. He posited that the gods are beings which once were men, and the actual race of man will in time become gods. It's a remarkably grand vision of human potential, suggesting an ultimate destiny for humanity that far transcended its current flawed state. He wasn't just talking about self-improvement, he was talking about literal deification.
Wow, a literal pathway to godhood if you just evolve correctly. That's quite an ambition. And in this profoundly chaotic environment, we also see the emergence of powerful apocalyptic visions. We're not just talking about the end of the world, but a hopeful, almost desperate optimism for a new, purified one.
Yes, exactly. The idea of a 1,000-year Reich is one notable example of such an apocalyptic idea. It offered a desperate optimism that directly countered the pervasive cultural pessimism of thinkers like Oswald Spengler, who mournfully predicted the inevitable death of the old world. The prevailing sentiment was that if the old, flawed world had to die in such agony, a new, perfected one must rise in its place. This profound desire for radical transformation would soon find a particularly potent and at times unsettling home. As we'll soon discover, Central Europe was about to become a crucible for some of the most fascinating and indeed unsettling experiments in this flight from reason.
Okay, so we've established the global stage, a world reeling from a crisis of reason, ripe for new ideas. Now let's zoom in on Central Europe, which became this incredibly fertile ground for these alternative visions. What was the general atmosphere there, especially in the wake of World War I?
Post-WWI Central Europe was, in Webb's compelling description, a neurasthenic society. Now, for those unfamiliar, neurasthenia was a fashionable diagnosis at the time, particularly among the educated classes. It described a pervasive societal malaise characterized by an appalling boredom, a lassitude of soul and body. Essentially, imagine a widespread feeling of existential exhaustion, where the traditional anchors of meaning had simply crumbled. This created incredibly fertile ground for anything that offered a new perspective, a spark of meaning, or, just a way to escape this profound spiritual fatigue.
It's like everyone just felt utterly drained and disillusioned, craving escape. And to give us a powerful illustration of how widespread this yearning for other realities became, consider Arthur Conan Doyle. The very logical, rational creator of Sherlock Holmes himself became a fervent spiritualist. Can you believe it? He was even inspecting what he believed were supernormal photographs of fairies. It's almost ironic, isn't it? The creator of the ultimate rational detective, so captivated by the supernatural that he's looking at photos of fairies. It really underscores how profoundly this desire for other realities had permeated society, reaching even the most unexpected corners.
Absolutely. It perfectly illustrates how deeply the desire for something beyond the material had permeated society, moving far beyond the fringes. From there, if we connect this to specific locales, cities like Prague and Vienna became absolute hotbeds of occult activity. Let's consider the Lodge of the Blue Star in Prague. These individuals were on an intense spiritual quest. They moved from the murky symbolism of figures like kerning to practicing breathing exercises and even contacting an 80-year-old English magician who they genuinely believed could evoke the different forces dwelling in old trees.
We evoke forces in trees. That's quite an image. What came of that kind of mystical practice? Did they, talk to the trees?
Well, it becomes even more intriguing. Through these concentration exercises, the lodge members claimed to achieve identical visions of a spiritual brotherhood centered on the pole star. Imagine that multiple individuals experiencing the same profound shared mystical vision. It suggests a powerful, collective subjective experience, though the ever-watchful Theosophical Society, that influential global mystical organization founded by Madame Blavatsky, eventually warned them off. Perhaps they saw them straying too far into uncharted territory. It reveals the often fine line between shared spiritual exploration and what established esoteric organizations deemed acceptable.
Fascinating. Okay, moving our gaze to Vienna, we find Rudolf Steiner, a figure whose influence would grow to be absolutely enormous. How did he emerge from this bubbling cauldron of Central European mysticism?
Steiner's genesis is remarkably insightful. He was initially deeply immersed in theosophical circles in Vienna, studying Oriental thought, medieval mysticism, Neoplatonism, and the Kabbala. A real deep dive. What was particularly remarkable is that he was also a liberal academic, renowned for his scholarly work on Goethe, a figure who himself had deep esoteric interest. Steiner actually reacted against the then-emerging notion of the unconscious, believing nothing should be unconscious. A fascinating stance. And this conviction profoundly shaped his unique blend of spiritual science. He transitioned from a traditional academic to a mystical lecturer, seeing his Goethean expertise as a bridge, almost a way to intellectualize and systematize these profound mystical experiences. His monist view, inspired by the biologist Ernst Haeckel, aimed to abolish the conventional distinction between matter and spirit, truly seeking to integrate the spiritual directly into the scientific framework.
That's a massive conceptual shift, blending rigorous academia with deep mysticism. It's quite the combination. Now, let's cross over to Munich, where we find another fascinating group, the Munich Cosmics. What spiritual and artistic visions were they chasing?
Munich's artistic coteries, like the Society for Modern Life, were right at the forefront of this new current. They passionately embraced spiritual art and a radical rejection of materialism, drawing powerful inspiration from French symbolism and even ancient Nordic myths. Key figures included the poet Stefan George, Karl Wolfskull, Alfred Schuller, Ludwig Klages, and the Bohemian Countess Fanny von Reventlow. Quite the crew. They truly saw art as a direct path to a deeper reality, a way to express the inexpressible.
And their aspirations were truly something else. I read that Schuller actually proposed resurrecting an ancient Greek healing dance, complete with intricate copper armor, to cure the ailing philosopher Nietzsche. Can you even begin to picture that scene? It sounds like something straight out of a fantasy epic. Seriously, copper armor.
It speaks volumes about the grand, almost mythical scale of their ambitions. They genuinely believe that a new priesthood has arisen to found a new empire of the spirit. While George himself remained primarily focused on his poetry and its artistic implications, others like Klages and Schuller attempted to envision a tangible, real future from these aesthetic positions. These visions often resulted in ideas that were symbolic, transcendental, and deeply illuminated, meaning, they believed they possessed special, mystical, or esoteric knowledge. This knowledge, they thought, granted them a deeper understanding of reality or a path to social transformation, usually outside of conventional reason. We also see figures like Johannes Müller, who founded Schloss Elmau, a place described as a hydropathic for better-off people and a holiday haven for poor students. Müller sought an organic society based on harmony with nature, advocating a daily life focused on perceiving the hidden motions of the soul.
So these were essentially proto-hippie communes, striving for a simpler, more spiritual existence in harmony with nature. But what's the downstream implication here? These seem like relatively harmless, if eccentric, ideals, don't they?
Well, this raises a profoundly important question, which Webb consistently highlights. The ease with which a seemingly harmless idealism might be converted to an illuminated approach of a very different, even darker nature is significant. For instance, Müller himself later found disturbing analogies between his ideas of organic society and Nazi thought. This illustrates a crucial, often tragic, slippery slope where a yearning for organic community and spiritual purity without critical anchors can be dangerously co-opted or reinterpreted. So yes, from artists seeking spiritual rebirth to communities trying to live in harmony with nature, Central Europe was buzzing with these alternative visions. But as we transition now across the North Sea, you'll see how these ideals, especially in post-WWI Britain, took on some truly fascinating and often surprisingly practical forms. Stay with us for that.
All right, so we've seen how Central Europe was a cauldron of spiritual and philosophical experimentation driven by a profound dissatisfaction with the rational world. Now, let's hop across the North Sea to post-World War I Britain. What kind of mystical ferment was brewing there, particularly among the youth?
Well, in Britain, much like on the continent, the failures of industrialism and the immense trauma of the Great War led to a powerful countercurrent. There was a significant rise in youth movements seeking a mythical golden age and yearning for the natural man, drawing heavily from what Webb terms the progressive underground. They yearned for a return to something purer, more elemental, something untouched by the perceived corruptions of modern society. It was a real back-to-nature vibe.
And this return to nature even had a rather unique pseudoscientific underpinning, right? Like Haeckel's biogenetic law. For our listeners, can you quickly break down what that means? Very simply, like ELI5 it for us.
Okay, absolutely. Think of Haeckel's biogenetic law basically as the idea that ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny. In simpler terms, it's a belief that an individual organism's development, from conception to adulthood that's its ontogeny, rapidly repeats the evolutionary history of its species, its phylogeny. So when they applied this to education, it meant children should literally live over again, experiences passed through by his ancestors. This led to incredibly romanticized ideas like starting a child's life in an orchard garden, akin to Eden, letting them sort of reconcile with the animal world as described in Isaiah 7. It was a deeply romanticized yet scientifically framed approach to human development, believing children should instinctively reconnect with these ancient stages.
That's a truly unique educational philosophy, one that sounds utterly charming, almost like a fairy tale, really living out evolution. From this foundation, we see movements like the woodcraft chivalry, founded by Aubrey Westlake. What did they stand for?
Aubrey Westlake, who was a Quaker with a keen interest in psychical research and later became an anthroposophist, a follower of Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, championed an outdoor life, self-government for youth, and a social religion. He notably deplored the militaristic nature of Baden-Powell's scouts, advocating instead for the development of the instinct of service to prevent future European disasters. For him, religion needed to be practical, social, and embedded in every detail of life, driven by the belief that a child, rightly influenced and rightly led, is never outside the kingdom of God. It was a holistic vision for society's renewal.
And then we have John Hargrave and the Kibbo Kift, described as a more militantly illuminated movement. They took these ideals of nature and renewal even further, didn't they? Sounds intense.
Yes. Hargrave advocated for race betterment through regeneration in the natural way, aiming to improve man by moving away from what he saw as unnatural means. He famously critiqued the Scouts, saying the boy had been taken into the woods by his wicked uncles, folded in the Union Jack and smothered. Pretty strong words. His vision was much more radical, seeking a complete break from what he perceived as a corrupt modern world, a true return to a primeval, powerful state.
Okay, and here's an absolutely astonishing detail. Hargrave's woodcraft chivalry developed the Grithford, which translates to peace army scheme. This was designed to transform unemployed youth by immersing them in a natural and simple environment where he can contact the four primary elements: earth, air, fire, and water. Sounds very elemental. And get this, it even involved communal Morris dancing. Imagine, solving unemployment through spiritual connection to nature and a bit of traditional folk dance. That's certainly not in any economic textbook I've ever read. Morris dancing for jobs.
It was a truly unique, almost utopian blend of social reform, spiritual aspiration, and a return to perceived ancient traditions, all wrapped in a collective experience. Beyond these youth movements, the British illuminated underground also pursued significant social and economic reforms. This included guild socialism, which romantically harked back to the Christian Middle Ages, drawing from figures like William Morris and John Ruskin. They aimed for nothing less than a spiritual revolution and the abolition of the wage system, gaining surprising support from thinkers like Bertrand Russell and prominent labor politician George Lansbury.
But the economic reforms really took a fascinating and, in retrospect, rather unusual turn with Major C.H. Douglas's social credit theory. What was that all about? Sounds a bit like crypto before crypto.
Well, social credit was a fresh economic theory that proposed industry-generated costs faster than it distributed purchasing power, leading to chronic underconsumption. A fundamental problem, he argued. Douglas proposed that the state should bridge this gap by issuing money directly to citizens as a national dividend and by applying a just or scientific price to goods. The aim was to ensure that everyone could benefit from technological progress and overcome poverty by redesigning the flow of money itself. It sounded almost magically simple, a fix for the system.
Now, for a truly astonishing downstream implication, this esoteric economic theory actually gained real political power. In Alberta, Canada, a social credit government ruled from 1935 all the way to 1971. That's decades. It was led by a fundamentalist preacher named William Aberhart, who masterfully used radio through his Calgary Prophetic Bible Institute to couple illuminated political doctrine to a basic transcendental message. Imagine an economic system rooted in and spread by prophecy. That's a profound connection between the spiritual and the practical.
It's a striking example of how these deeply held, often spiritualized beliefs could translate into concrete political action and maintain power for decades. It really happened. Hargrave's Kibbo Kift even adopted social credit, transforming into the green shirt movement, using unarmed military technique like marches and drummers to attract attention and often drown out political opposition. This reveals a clear and concerning pathway from esoteric thought to organized, even quasi-militarized political action.
Now, here's where we glimpse a darker, more unsettling current. While less organized than in Germany, illuminated groups in Britain also displayed early anti-Semitic tendencies, often fueled by elaborate conspiracy theories. Nesta Webster is a key figure here.
Nesta Webster, yes. Author of Secret Societies and Subversive Movements back in 1924. She was convinced of a vast world conspiracy driven by a cabal of Grand Orient Masonry, Theosophy, Pan-Germanism, international finance, and social revolution. Basically everyone she didn't like. She literally believed in occult power at work in the world and powers of darkness, and her belief was so intense she reportedly opened her front door with a loaded revolver. This highlights a chilling shift from idealism to outright paranoia, seeing malevolent hidden forces everywhere.
Wow. And even Major Douglas, the social credit theorist, tragically descended into this realm. That's quite a turn. He became quite extravagant, endorsing Webster's occult anti-Semitism, claiming world unrest and war led back to occultism, and that the Talmud so organized the Jews that the masters of the Kabbala were able to use them as one unit. He even bizarrely claimed Hitler was related to the Rothschilds. This is a truly convoluted conspiracy theory.
It is. And this is a chilling connection to the flight from reason we discussed earlier. Webb notes that this retreat to the magical was tragically assisted by the medieval vision of the diabolical Jew, making it one of the most dangerous forms of illuminated anti-Semitism. It's a stark reminder of how easily the search for hidden truths can morph into identifying scapegoats, often with devastating consequences.
The leap from utopian ideals to dark conspiracy theories is a chilling one, isn't it? As we cross the continent once more, we'll see how these threads of mysticism, political ambition, and outright paranoia intertwined in Russia, creating an environment ripe for what would become perhaps the most infamous manifestation of illuminated politics. Don't go anywhere. Our journey takes an even more intriguing turn as we head east. Western Europe had this perennial hope, ex oriente lux, a belief that spiritual light, a deeper wisdom, would emanate from the east. But Russia, with its unique position bridging East and West, found itself looking both ways, creating its own remarkable synthesis of spiritual thought.
Yes, absolutely. At the turn of the century, Russia experienced what's known as a philosophical silver age. This was a period of intense intellectual and spiritual ferment, an awakening of independent and original philosophical thought, of intense poetical imagination and aesthetic sensibility. A real flourishing. It was deeply marked by profound spiritual disquiet and religious searching, and by widespread interest in mysticism and even occultism. It was a society ripe for transformation, grappling with its own identity and seeking profound answers.
And a central figure in this intellectual and spiritual revival was Vladimir Solovyev. He had this incredible, almost mythic personal vision, didn't he? Tell us about Sophia.
Solovyev was indeed a key figure. After a profound vision of Sophia, or divine wisdom personified, he famously abandoned his studies of Western esoteric figures like Jacob Boehme and Eliphas Levi. He rushed off to Egypt, where he then claimed to receive a mysterious, almost prophetic order to go to Thebes. Quite the detour. He held complex, often critical views on Theosophy, seeing it as little more than a charlatan's attempt to adapt Buddhism to European tastes, believing it lacked true spiritual depth.
Okay, prepare for a truly astonishing detail for you. Madame Blavatsky, the legendary founder of Theosophy herself, was actually Helena von Hahn, a Russian military cousin to a future prime minister, Count Witt. That's incredible. Solovyev even described her as an incarnation of the type of old-time Russian country lady. And get this, she once yearned to return, be Russian, Christian, Orthodox, but felt she was in chains, not truly herself. That's an incredible internal conflict for someone who founded a global mystical movement rooted in Eastern philosophies. Talk about divided loyalties.
It certainly adds a whole new dimension to her complex persona, doesn't it? And this fervent interest in occultism wasn't limited to scholars and intellectuals. It penetrated the very highest echelons of society. Even in symbolist circles, figures like the poet Alexander Blok claimed prophetic visions. And Valery Brysov's dabbling in hypnotism tragically led to a dramatic love triangle, with a woman trying to shoot him and fellow poet Andrei Bailey, eventually succumbing to morphine addiction and suicide. This illustrates the intense, sometimes dangerous personal stakes involved when exploring these other realities. It wasn't just abstract ideas.
So if the intelligentsia and artists were dabbling in such high-stakes mysticism, imagine what was going on in the imperial court of Nicholas II in Alexandria. It sounds like it became a veritable battle of the magicians, didn't it? A psychic showdown at the palace.
It absolutely did. The court became a battleground for competing holy men and occultists, all fiercely vying for influence over the deeply superstitious imperial couple. The Montenegrin princesses, Militsa and Anastasia, were particularly passionately interested in the occult and acted as key intermediaries, introducing these various spiritual figures to the empress. They were the gatekeepers, essentially.
And before Rasputin arrived on the scene, there was a whole parade of eccentric gurus and holy men. Tell us about some of these fascinating characters. This sounds wild.
Oh, the list is wonderfully bizarre and colorful. There was Matryoshka the Barefooted, who delivered prophecies to Petersburg servant girls. Then there was the 110-year-old Pasha Sarovskaya, who initially wanted to beat the imperial couple. Yes, beat them, but eventually predicted the birth of a son. Vladimir Tkachenko, an illiterate soldier carrying an immense silver cross, whose very presence sparked intense envy among rival holy men. And Mitya the Blissful, a man whose inarticulate grunts were solemnly interpreted by special illumination by his followers for the court. You couldn't make this stuff up.
Interpreting grunts, wow. And the truly astonishing detail that solidified the reputation of these holy fools at court was the birth of the Tsarevich, the heir. It occurred after Daria Osipova, described as an imbecile with periodic fits of violence, arrived at Tsarskoye Selo. It cemented the court's belief that these mystics held genuine supernatural power over their destinies. Timing is everything, I guess.
Exactly. The perceived connection between such figures in the imperial succession gave them immense, albeit fleeting, power, often to the detriment of rational counsel. French occultists like Papus, a Martinist, that's a member of a French mystical Christian order, and a believer in vast conspiracy theories, and Philippe, a Lyonnais mystic, also held sway at different times. Papus even sensationally claimed to have evoked the spirit of Alexander III before the Tsar and Tsarina themselves. Can you imagine? Conjuring the dead Tsar. This is a truly dramatic demonstration of their perceived influence over the deeply impressionable imperial couple.
From the whispered prophecies in the drawing rooms of St. Petersburg, we then see the emergence of truly illuminated and terrifying Russian politics, like the figure of Baron Roman Feodorovich von Ungern-Sternberg. What an unforgettable name. And a terrifying figure.
Ungern-Sternberg was an out-and-out illuminate, an illuminated anti-Semite who, in an astonishing display of mystical ambition and brutality, attempted to create an order of military Buddhists in Mongolia. He was known for terrorizing his army with extreme cruelty, introducing excesses like alcohol, opium, and hashish, then paradoxically hanging his men for indulging in them. Total contradiction. Yet, this same man also installed electricity and wireless stations in Mongolia. A strange mix of ancient mysticism and modern tech. His relative, Hermann Kaiserling, even described Ossendowski's characterization of him as extremely accurate, a blend of mystic and barbarian. It's a terrifying, almost surreal blend of mysticism, modern technology, and extreme barbarism.
That's a chilling example of what happens when these esoteric beliefs intertwine with absolute power and a complete disregard for human life. Truly scary stuff. And the triumph of communism only accelerated this influx of Russian mystics and idealists westward, didn't it?
Yes, the 1920s saw a torrent of rejected knowledge pour into Western Europe as Russian idealists and mystics fled the Bolshevik Revolution. This significantly influenced existing European underground movements, enriching them with new perspectives and a deeper sense of urgency, carrying with them a profound sense of foreboding about the fate of the rational world.
From whispered prophecies in imperial palaces to barbaric mystical armies in Mongolia, the connections between the occult and raw power become increasingly unsettling. And it's in this volatile mix that we confront perhaps the most disturbing and persistent manifestation of illuminated politics, the conspiracy theory, particularly one that fed the darkest prejudices. We have to go there next. So we've traced these threads of idealism and mysticism, often with a hint of something darker and more sinister lurking beneath. Now we arrive at a truly disturbing nexus, the intersection of occultism, anti-Semitism, and the infamous protocols of the Elders of Zion. This is heavy stuff.
It is. And this is a critical point, because the protocols, claiming a Jewish plot for world domination, was deeply intertwined with occult figures and theories. Webb's profound insight here is that the occult has played a larger part in the genesis and propagation of this forgery than has been admitted. And the recognition of this fact can make plainer the devil-ridden universe in which such imaginings originate. Understanding this context helps us grasp the Nazi episode more fully. It wasn't just political opportunism, but a world built on a perceived cosmic battle.
So it wasn't just a cynical political pamphlet. It sprang from this dark, mystical worldview. That's a crucial distinction. And French anti-Semitism, often considered the progenitor of its modern form, had its own clear occult connections.
Indeed. Edouard Drumont, considered the father of modern French anti-Semitism, literally carried a mandrake root, a plant associated with magical properties, red palms for his newspaper staff, and even published in an occult review. His friend, Gaston Marie, was converted to anti-Semitism by a seeress who predicted Paris's chastisement. This clearly shows how, at the very foundations of modern anti-Semitism, there was often a deep-seated belief in supernatural forces and hidden agendas, a readiness to believe in an unseen hand guiding global events.
And then there's Yuliana Glinka, a Russian maid of honor and theosophist who seems to be a pivotal figure in the protocol's journey from France to Russia.
Yuliana Glinka is strongly implicated as the likely person who brought the protocols from France to Russia, and quite possibly even authored The Secret of the Jews, a document detailing a Jewish Masonic conspiracy that explicitly utilized Solomon's seal and magical lore. This is a striking example of a renegade occultist who, perhaps out of perceived betrayal or genuine fear, turns their knowledge of esoteric systems against what they believed were dark conspiratorial forces. What's even more complex is that Theosophy itself was sometimes accused of being part of the conspiracy. Rudolf Steiner, for example, believed it had been taken over by Russian-oriented politics. The rabbit hole goes very, very deep.
The layers of conspiracy are truly dizzying. Okay, now let's turn to Germany, where post-WWI misery and humiliation became incredibly fertile ground for illuminated nationalism. This blended occult revival with very specific Volkish or folkish ideas.
Exactly. The Volkish movement sought a return to perceived ancient Germanic roots and a mystical, almost sacred connection to the land and the blood of the race. Guido von List, a key figure, published Archaeological Occultism back in 1891, interpreting Germanic landscapes and runes as repositories of ancient wisdom. He even composed a pantheistic catechism to his god, Allvater. He laid foundational ideas for a racial mysticism that imbued the German people and landscape with a unique spiritual destiny.
And then there's Lanz von Liebenfels, whose Ariosophy was profoundly and horrifyingly racist, advocating for an Aryan race characterized by blonde hair and blue eyes, slender hands and feet, and elongated craniums, a very specific, almost eugenic vision of racial purity. But here's the astonishing and deeply disturbing link. His racism actually drew heavily from Madame Blavatsky's own secret doctrine. How does that work?
This is a critical and truly horrifying connection that Webb meticulously uncovers. Lanz twisted Blavatsky's complex, often contradictory occult ideas about root races and human evolution to essentially discover and justify subhuman races from the time of the Assyrians. This demonstrates how easily sophisticated, even seemingly benign or purely spiritual, esoteric concepts could be perverted and weaponized into utterly destructive ideologies like racial supremacy. It's a stark warning of the dangers of uncritical, ideologically driven interpretation.
And these toxic ideas weren't just on the fringes. They found their way into the very heart of the nascent Nazi Party through key figures. Let's start with Dietrich Eckart, Hitler's early mentor.
Eckart was deeply involved in the Occult Underground, well-versed in theosophical politics, and a vehement anti-Semite. He even accused Rudolf Steiner of being a Jewish mesmerizer and an agent of a Jewish Masonic communist conspiracy, seeing vast hidden enemies everywhere. Paranoia doesn't begin to cover it. His influence on the nascent Nazi Party and on Hitler himself was profound, shaping the early intellectual and mystical framework of the movement. Then there was Alfred Rosenberg, Hitler's chief ideologist, who was converted to anti-Semitism after reading Nihilist's Protocols in 1917. That forgery again. Rosenberg saw racial history not just as genetics, but as the inner life of the soul and spiritual mysticism, believed Atlantis was the Aryan homeland, and incorporated occult history into his ideology. He even advocated for German knowledge to include things like somnambulism and clairvoyance. Seriously.
And the SS leader, Heinrich Himmler, was also deeply into this, right? I've heard he even saw himself as a reincarnation of a historical figure, like literally thought he was someone else.
Himmler was indeed a fervent believer in karma and reincarnation. He sometimes saw himself as a reborn Henry the Fowler, a medieval German king, or even Henry the Lion, a powerful duke. He supported cults of Teutonic heroes and saw his SS as a time-defying order of heroes with a special mission, reflecting clear occult influences. He actively fostered occult projects and pseudosciences within the SS, showing how these intensely private esoteric beliefs could shape official policy and military organization, blurring the lines between mystic vision and state power.
What about Hitler himself? Were his personal interests also rooted in the occult? It's often debated, a lot of speculation flies around.
Well, while direct, conclusive evidence is murky and often sensationalized, there is evidence of Hitler's early interest in occult literature. He possibly read Lanz von Liebenfels' Ostara magazine, with its racist Ariosophical ideas. Joseph Greiner, one of his companions from a Viennese men's hostel, described Hitler engaging in long metaphysical discussions with a lapsed priest rabbi's son named Grill about cosmic rays. Grill even apparently tried to cure Hitler's hatred of Jews through these discussions. While this account is viewed with reservations by some historians, it suggests an early exposure and engagement with these types of illuminated ideas, painting a picture of a young man drawn to alternative, powerful explanations for the world.
And then there's the utterly bizarre cosmic ice theory of Hans Herberger. Expert, how did that fit into this disturbing picture? Ice.
Cosmic ice theory, or Welteislehr. It was a cosmology proposing that cosmic ice governed the universe, predicting planetary collisions and influencing everything from tides to climates. As outlandish as it sounds, it was embraced by Himmler and Volkisch circles. It was even linked by some to astrology and seen as truth of astrology. It offered a grand, cosmic narrative that resonated with their desire for a foundational mystical explanation of the world, connecting them to an ancient, powerful destiny. Now, it's crucial to reiterate Webb's perspective here. Despite his initial skeptical tone towards these movements as irrationalist, he meticulously documented their profound and often horrifying real-world impact. He didn't dismiss them as mere folly. He showed how these beliefs within the private realities of their adherents were profoundly logical and offered compelling explanations and solutions to the world's chaos. His objective presentation forces us to confront the very real-world consequences when such beliefs take hold and are acted upon.
The shadows of the past truly cast long, dark lines into the future, don't they? But the story of occultism isn't just about ancient conspiracies and political fanaticism. It also intersects with the very foundations of modern psychology, challenging our understanding of the mind itself. And even, as we'll see next, shaping the counterculture movements of the 1960s. It's quite a pivot. So we've navigated the treacherous political and social currents and the unsettling rise of illuminated anti-Semitism. Now let's shift gears and explore how these underlying occult themes found their way into the very fabric of modern psychology and even, eventually, the vibrant revolutionary counterculture of the 1960s. It starts, surprisingly, with none other than Sigmund Freud.
Yes, what's truly fascinating is Freud's initial reaction to occultism. He saw it as a black tide of mud against which psychoanalysis must be a bulwark. Strong words. This wasn't just intellectual disdain, it was partly due to his fierce need for scientific credibility. Remember, he'd faced intense criticism for his own early work on hypnosis, which, let's not forget, had emerged directly from Franz Mesmer's overtly occult healing practices. So he was trying to establish a rigorous new science, and the occult was a perceived threat to that hard-won legitimacy. He needed distance.
Right. And his friend Wilhelm Flies was also connected to these esoteric ideas, wasn't he? The influence was close by.
Yes. Flies, a close friend and confidant of Freud for a time, developed highly influential theories on periodic laws, like cycles of creativity and illness, often linked to menstrual cycles, and even a mystical link of the blood. These ideas found surprising favor with Theosophical and Volkisch publishers and significantly influenced occultists interested in prophecy and hidden rhythms of the universe. So even at the very genesis of psychoanalysis, these rejected knowledges were circling nearby, influencing its early development.
But then comes C.G. Jung, Freud's most famous and ultimately rebellious student, and his journey into the occult is a profound divergence from his mentor's path.
Oh, absolutely. Jung's interest in the paranormal began remarkably early. He described apparently meaningless explosions in his home, a split tabletop, a shattered carving knife. Spooky stuff. He attended seances and devoured virtually the whole of the literature available on the occult, deeply immersing himself. The truly profound difference is that Jung diverged sharply from Freud. He saw Freud's sexual theory as just as unproven an hypothesis as occultism, a direct challenge. He became in many ways the heir to the still unsecularized attempts to establish a mind cure, developing a concept of the unconscious, particularly the collective unconscious, that drew heavily from his deep occult reading, alchemical studies, and Swiss mysticism. This then profoundly influenced scholarly mystics at the Eranos conferences, bridging psychology with ancient wisdom traditions.
So while Freud built a bulwark against it, Jung, in essence, opened the gates and invited the occult in, seeing it as integral to the human psyche. But this also led to some dangerous possibilities, didn't it? There was a downside.
Yes, this raises a profoundly important and often uncomfortable question. Jung's theories, particularly with their explicit focus on racial psychology, such as his ideas on differences between Germanic and Jewish psychology, could be, and unfortunately were, interpreted to align with Nazi ideology. He even contributed to the Zentralblatt for Psychotherapy in 1933, stating that the differences which actually do exist between Germanic and Jewish psychology are no longer to be glossed over. That's problematic. This shows how even sophisticated psychological frameworks, when applied uncritically or within a specific ideological context, could be twisted to lend themselves to illuminated viewpoints with horrifying implications. It highlights the fragility of intellectual and moral boundaries in times of collective distress.
Okay, from the academic halls of psychology, let's fast forward to the post-WWII era and the vibrant revolutionary counterculture of the 1960s. How did these esoteric ideas evolve into something called secular Gnosticism in this new cultural landscape? What does that even mean?
Well, after World War II, modern culture, particularly the burgeoning counterculture, embraced what Webb calls secular Gnosticism. Now, simply put, Gnosticism originally referred to ancient mystical systems believing in a secret divine knowledge, gnosis, that could liberate one from the material world. Secular Gnosticism adapted this core idea. It was essentially the idea of a profound personal liberation, a yearning to be free from the constraints of being human, from helplessness, mutual isolation, and mortality. But crucially, it sought this liberation through non-religious, often personal or even chemical means. What's key is that this often occurred without the adherents even realizing its deep historical occult roots. It was a search for self-transcendence, repackaged for a new modern age.
And even modern art, which often seems so grounded in pure aesthetics, had these esoteric depths, right? It wasn't just the hippies getting mystical.
Absolutely. Think of figures like Johannes Eden. His influential preliminary course at the Bauhaus, a cradle of modern art and architecture, was remarkably based on Mazdasan breathing exercises. Mazdasan was an esoteric system combining Zoroastrianism with health practices. Wassily Kandinsky, too, a pioneer of abstract art, was deeply influenced by mysticism and Slav irrationalism, carrying esoteric ideas directly into the avant-garde. The very visual language of modernity, the way we see and design our world, had these hidden mystical undercurrents.
Meanwhile, in America, there was a pervading sense of anxiety in the post-war era. Remember Orson Welles' War of the Worlds broadcast causing widespread panic in 1938? Classic example. This created a huge, almost desperate demand for other realities. And this leads us to a truly astonishing connection, the emergence of LSD and the shaping of the counterculture.
This is where the historical threads truly converge in a powerful, almost explosive way. Figures like Aldous Huxley, the visionary author, who was actually introduced to mescaline, a psychedelic compound, by none other than Aleister Crowley himself. Mind blown, right? And Timothy Leary, the charismatic psychologist who saw his LSD experiences as a mystical rebirth, embraced Hindu mythology and became a self-proclaimed guru, urging people to turn on, tune in, drop out. They profoundly shaped the 1960s counterculture. Ken Kesey's famous acid tests were designed to expand consciousness for the masses, promising a shortcut to enlightenment.
So the psychedelic movement was essentially seeking liberation from the prison of the personality, individual loneliness, and ultimately matter, echoing those 19th century occult revival themes in Oriental religions, but with a new, potent chemical catalyst. And what about the Aquarian Age that became such a popular concept? Everyone was singing about it.
Right, the idea of entering a new astrological eon, the Aquarian Age, became a rallying cry for the hippies, symbolizing a new era of peace, love, and spiritual enlightenment. This was largely popularized by Gavin Arthur, who, get this, was the great-grandson of a U.S. president and a Jungian astrologer living in Haight-Ashbury, the epicenter of the counterculture. Quite the pedigree. What's often overlooked is that while the hippies adopted it with fervor, the concept itself had ancient origins, possibly calculable as far back as ancient Chaldea. It wasn't a new invention, but a rediscovered, re-energized prophecy for a new generation seeking hope.
And even activist groups like the Diggers and the French Situationists embodied these spiritual revolution ideals in their pursuit of radical social change. They weren't just about politics.
Exactly. The Diggers, a San Francisco anarchist group, drew parallels to 17th century English millenarians, those radical Protestant sects who sought social equality, simplicity of living, and religious illumination. History repeating itself in a way. The French Situationists, for their part, saw surrealism as the beginning of revolutionary experience and called for a revolution in perception that would transform everyday life itself. Both groups, in their own unique ways, sought a fundamental transformation of reality through expanded consciousness. We even see Wilhelm Reich, Freud's controversial student who believed in orgone energy, a pervasive blue life force he literally called life or God. He developed orgone accumulators, devices he claimed could cure cancer, control weather, and even communicate with aliens. His later work, which he saw as a natural development of earlier theories, described liberation as literally breaking out of the trap of man's emotional structure to fully tap into this cosmic energy.
Wow, from the subtle energies of the psyche to communicating with extraterrestrials in Orgon boxes, that's quite the trajectory. And finally, the Marxist philosopher Herbert Marcuse even connected the dots between critical theory and the psychedelic experience.
Yes, Marquise, a key figure in the Frankfurt School, saw the LSD trip as a distorted manner of anticipating social liberation. He saw it as a potential revolution in perception that could create a new aesthetic environment, explicitly taking inspiration from the great artistic rebellion of the WWI era. He recognized that profound social change might require a fundamental shift in consciousness itself, a revolution in perception, akin to those early 20th century idealists who sought to reshape the world from the inside out. It all comes full circle, in a way. Hey.
Wow, what an extraordinary journey we've taken together. Seriously, my head is spinning a little. From the shadowed lodges of Prague to the opulent yet superstitious halls of the Russian czars, from the eerie origins of Nazi ideology and obscure Volkish movements to the kaleidoscopic dreams of Haight-Ashbury. The arc of occultism has been a constant evolving force. It's a perennial human response to profound anxiety and a relentless search for meaning beyond the mundane, the rational, or the purely material. It's truly incredible to see how these rejected knowledges don't simply fade away. They transform, they adapt, they reemerge, often shaping movements in ways their originators might never have imagined. Sometimes for inspiring good, sometimes, as we've seen, for terrifying ill.
Exactly. And the enduring lesson from this deep dive into the occult establishment, I think, isn't really about the truth or falsity of these beliefs per se. It's about the profound human impulse to escape the confines of ordinary reality when faced with crisis. That seems to be the constant driver. Whether it's the search for a new consciousness, a spiritual revolution, or simply liberation from the prison of the personality, this deep dive shows us how the imagination, when unleashed in times of collective distress, can indeed reshape the world for better or for worse. It raises the powerful question for all of us, really. When does our search for otherness, for something more, become a flight from what's truly here? A flight from the challenges and realities that demand our attention right now.
And that, my friends, is a question to truly mull over. A big one. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredible deep dive into the hidden currents of history. We hope you've been as awestruck and illuminated as we have been. I know I have. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and check out our exclusive memberships for even more incredible content like this. Until next time, keep digging into the mysteries that shape our world.